One great Wednesday, and welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host King, and I'm joined today by my co-host Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing really well, King. Just have some good energy. The week's off to a pretty good start, and happy to be here with you as always.
Same here, same here. And as we like to get things started with our gratitude moment, I'll begin by saying I'm grateful for again my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Grateful for having a roof over my head, a mother who's alive and have sound mind, and I'm grateful for the ability to just enjoy the beauty of the day and be in a grateful space. And I'm also grateful for just meeting people who are in line with my principles and values. I really recognize the importance and blessing of that now more than ever before. So that's my gratitude moment.
Yeah, thanks. So I always want to just echo what you say because that's all that but more specifically, more personally for me, you know, I love having indoor plumbing and just having a roof over my head, having a relatively sound body and mind to function with. Um, Food in a refrigerator, and just really basic, simple things, and more focused. The way I completed our conversation last week, I mentioned a fully human guy. This guy that I think embraces that fully human connection that we're talking about is my friend Larry, who was a candidate last week for lung transplant, and as we're talking right now, he's in the IC unit at Brigham and Young. Yeah, sure, Brigham and Young, Brigham and Women's Lung Center in hospital in Boston, and he had the transplant yesterday. It's on the table for in the vicinity of 10 or 11 hours. Next 48 hours are really important, but I want to express gratitude specifically for him as a good friend, but for the team, the lung transplant team that can do things that I can only imagine, and it involved 2 heart bypasses before the actual lung transplant, who were able to do that surgery and know enough that of the 2 lungs that the right one was fine, but the left donor lung was scarred, somewhat damaged, so they couldn't use that. So just replaced 1 lung rather than 2. And then another level of gratitude beyond this extraordinarily skillful science that allows that to happen, in this 3rd decade of the 21st century. Somewhere in Philadelphia, there's a family who lost someone in the last 48 hours who was an organ donor that made this possible. So, deep gratitude. And by protocol, the recipient doesn't get a lot of information about who the person was, other than that, in this case, the person was in their 30s. That's about all that he knows. So gratitude for the generosity of somebody who chooses to be an organ donor, and for the family that allows that to happen. And now that person's lung is in my friend's body. That's pretty amazing to me, and I'm grateful for it.
Absolutely, I concur with that, and that's definitely a miraculous story you shared. And like I said, I think that I'll definitely like to keep your friend's recovery maybe speedy and full back to health and in my prayers.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, one of the things that before we get started, I just really want to acknowledge that the fact is, you know, lately I've been committing myself more than ever before to get up in the morning and taking a morning walk. And I've always loved the mornings, but I would let other things before keep it sporadic, and I would just walk other times throughout my day. But now I force myself to get up and walk starting at 7 o'clock because the sun's coming up at that time. And walking the harbor, walking around Baltimore, the stadium, and just really, I love that morning audience. That's one thing I wanted to add before we get started. Just seeing people out there at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's a different energy with those people than it is people. If I walk around noon or I walk around 4 p.m., that's a whole different energy of those people. And again, I'm not saying it from a judgment context, I'm just saying the energy is different. People in the morning are typically more pleasant. They speak, it's it's like we talked about before last week with the motorcycle with the wave. It's that kind of energy where people just acknowledge, yeah, you're an early riser, and I acknowledge you as well. So no one really says it verbally, but we say that with our eyes and our energy. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. That's just really for me. I've been doing it for the last 26 days. And like I said, for me, my goal is anything that I'm going to do, I'm going to make a commitment before I stop it or I change it to do it for at least 30 days straight. So that's my commitment to anything I begin. And so I'm really loving it. So I just want to add that as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just as you were sharing that, the 30-day piece, I'm going to just mention something that I know kind of superficially, but there's research somewhere, and take it with a grain of sand because I only have a vague memory of it, that basically says 21 days is the minimum target. If you want to change a habit or create a habit, that 21 days is a marker that seems to really make a difference. So 30 for you, you're over that marker. So it seems like a really grounded, approach that you have. And again, I wish I could remember what that's from. I just have the memory of that 21-day target that, some researcher found that, but I don't want to say too much more about it because I can't remember the details. So.
I've heard about it before. That's why I kind of based the 30 days on. So, but thank you for sharing that as well. So excited about, the topic this week. So why don't you walk us into what we're going to discuss this week as well?
Yeah. So we, as anyone who has touched base with us in any of these podcasts since June of 2022 knows that we're speaking about my book, Healing America's Narratives. And the subtitle is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And there's a little tagline that says, Becoming More Fully Human. And the past month or two, we're navigating chapter 11 of the book, which is entitled, So Now What? I mean, my joke is that for the first 10 chapters, I just provide the bad news, like, the problems that we face, what the shadow is, and both in current events and the history of the United States, there's some stuff that we really need to own and recognize and heal. And for the past 5 weeks, we've been speaking about some questions and statements that are useful for individuals to explore in some detail in order to begin to heal themselves and become more fully human, to use that language. And just really briefly, last week we looked at who are my people, as you mentioned that. But the previous weeks before that, we explored who am I really? Everything is a story. What's my impact and what impacts me? What am I not seeing? And today is really kind of a stark reminder, and it's the sixth of the 7 statements and questions. And it's a very stark statement that says, I am going to die. And it's a really important thing to remember because it gives us a healthy sense of urgency to life, not crazy, obsessive urgency, but I don't have forever to live this life. I have a limited time. And given the evidence that we know, given enough time, everybody dies. Nobody hasn't died. And in the context of I am going to die, if we consider how we hold the question, who am I really? And how we hold the question, who are my people? And any of those other previous statements or questions, including everything is a story, they all really interact with each other and the reality that I am going to die. Because who I think I am, if I'm just a bunch of bones and muscles and some chemicals in my brain and electronic impulses that make me a human being, if that's all I am, then dying is that, this thing just disappears. But if I identify at a soul level or a spirit level, the question of my death and dying takes on a different, I don't want to say level of importance, but it has a different feel to it. So this exploration of I am going to die is really important because we don't know, none of us knows how we're going to die. We can have all our stories about it, but we don't know how, when, who we're going to be with. We do know that every breath we take is getting closer to our final breath and further away from our initial breath. It's not particularly funny, but for some reason it makes me smile when I say it out loud. And there's nothing we can do about it. You know, all of the billionaires who want to go up to space or, you know, escape to their islands, whatever it happens to be, they're going to die, right? The poorest person, whether it's in an inner city somewhere or somewhere in rural America, it's going to die. So we share that. And in terms of our healing individually, as families, as communities, as states, as a nation, that's one of the things that we have in common, and recognizing it, I would like to think, can bring us closer together. I mean, the evidence is so far not working that way, but I believe that if we're really reflective and conscious of that, and we can look at somebody who's, let's say, a political opponent or someone with whom we disagree, and just recognize that common humanity in that moment, you know, eyeball to eyeball, it's easier to feel some compassion and empathy, not necessarily agree with what they have to say, but just to remember that we're all human. So it's kind of a lengthy introduction. So I'll put a period there. But yeah, today's topic is I am going to die, in the context of healing America's narratives and integrating shadow.
A very interesting topic. And, you know, that definitely creates a lot to unpack. But, you know, some initial questions come to mind when you talked, because you talked about the fact of, which is true, no one knows when, how they're going to die. So my first question for you, and this is more out of curiosity, it's a two-part question. First, personally, do you believe that life would be better if you did know when and how? And secondly, when you talked about it in your book, do you believe that, now this is more of just your speculation, of course, that if people did know that it was like a known thing, that will make us behave differently towards each other, knowing that? I just want to kind of get your personal thoughts on, would it change your behavior? Would it, first of all, the question is, do you think your life would be better? Would you be better able to navigate life and be happier, more fulfilled if you knew personally your day and how? And second part of the question is, do you think, based on the book, that people would treat each other better if they knew as well?
Yeah. So there's three things that come up. One for me is occasionally, like, hypotheticals can be useful to kind of get clear on certain things, but I also believe that none of us really knows the answer to a hypothetical because we're not in that reality. So I'm going to answer, so just say that, because people, you know, I know a lot of people that say what they would do if there was ever an active shooter, God forbid, or what they would do in this situation. And
Right.
every combat veteran I know, and I know a handful, both, you know, from Vietnam forward through Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, with all their training, with live fire training and everything, you know, when they're being trained, they all say nobody knows how they're going to respond the first time they're in real combat. So, you know, they can imagine it, but nobody knows that. So but more to your question, my sense is, and I don't know, but my best sense for me is that knowing would bring a kind of like at some point in my life, as I got increasingly closer to my death, it would bring this sense of, you know, like, maybe a sense of urgency, or more urgency, maybe a sense of sadness. And I don't know if I would want that. It would also allow me to make sure I dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's with my relationships as I got closer and closer to, you know, I'd have the time frame to make sure, you know, I didn't die wishing I had told somebody I loved them or whatever it is. But not knowing, and again, just to make this real, I'm 60, I'll be 69 in 2 months. Not knowing provides me with the opportunity / makes me have to live with the reality that if I have something to say to somebody or something I want to try to accomplish or do, I don't know when I'm going to die. So I better get off the couch and do it now, because I don't know. I might live another 20, 25 years, or I could die, God forbid, as you're talking to me right now. So, I mean, I kind of live with that reality, not knowing, and I know I'm going to die. And I know that I'm pretty healthy, and I know that that doesn't matter because there could be something hidden or an accident or anything. So I don't think knowing would shift my day-to-day too much until I was getting increasingly closer to that final year or 6 months or 2 days or whatever it is. But I could argue the opposite too. Wow, I could really prepare for my death so much more consciously, because I knew where it was going to be. And I could do certain things more intentionally as I planned for that day, as we plan for different things in our lives. So what I'm basically saying is I can look at both sides of that, or all sides of it, and I don't really have a clear answer for myself personally. I don't. And I live in the reality that I don't know. So if I knew as a hypothetical, and I can guess how I would change things, but I'm not really clear. So that's one. Number two is, do you think, do I think people, if everybody knew when they were going to die, if it would shift their behaviors? And so here's my best guess about that. And, obviously I don't know the answer to that, because there's almost 8 billion people on the planet, or just, right around 8 billion. What do I know about all of them? Except they're all going to die. My experience of life and the people I've come in contact with is that the vast majority of the people on the planet, and those I kind of observe from far away now because of technology, and whether they're in what country they're in or wherever they are, what age they are, their sexual orientation, all of that. The vast majority of people get up in the morning and try to live a decent life. That's my experience. There are some people that, through ignorance, arrogance, greed, bigotry, whatever, get up in the morning and make things harder for other human beings. So my best guess, because of this sense that the vast majority of us are really just decent and trying to do a good job, with all of the bombardment from the larger culture at large, which is in this country consumer-based and money-based, and buy this, and your life is a success if you have this, and it's about having and owning. With all of that, I think that those people who are already living a decent life would accelerate their decency, and with this known endpoint in sight. And those who are doing damage would practice their greed, their arrogance, their ignorance, their bigotry, their violence, their excess. They just want to get more and more and more, and before they died, because that's their idea of success. More for me. Now, might somebody, given this sudden, here's your date, right? April 1st, make it April Fool's Day just for fun. April 1st, 2035, I don't know, make something up. Might that shock somebody if we suddenly had that knowledge into, being transformed and letting go of their hatred or their bigotry? That's possible, because we know that recovering from trauma is often a transformative moment in life. So, so I feel a little bit wishy-washy, because I sound like I'm saying, well, King, those are great questions, and I don't know. That's really where I'm standing, with that, because I really don't know, but that's my sense of it. There would be this sense of urgency, but the urgency might impact different people in different ways. And if my inclination is to be good and helpful and generous and loving and compassionate, I'm sensing I would live into that more. And if my inclination has been toward ignorance, arrogance, greed, violence, bigotry, excess, I might lean into that more. But that's me telling a story. And as we know, everything is a story. So.
Absolutely. When you sent me that question as to prepare for today's show,
Yeah.
and when I read that question, I thought about that. and a movie idea came to my mind. And it's a movie that was based off the fact is, imagine a world in which you can buy a test to know when you're going to die.
Okay.
But the test was very expensive, like a house. You had to get a loan for the average person. So you couldn't just go out and just, go to CVS and just take the test. You had to, pay $150,000 for the test. So it was a test that you either had to save up for, you had to take a loan for, but so it required a different level of your desire. How bad do you really want to know this information? And so, of course, the rich people would have known the answer, and they would all get a test. But they operated differently based off that, because depending on your depending on the results you're going to get, is going to determine how you would behave. So, folks, for example, would find out they're going to die and they're 34. They're going to die in 8 years. So now they're going to smoke, they're going to drink, they're going to, do all the sins they can, because they realize, why should I not? And then, of course, you have the other person. So I'm saying that because as I really begin to really just kind of think this through and play with those ideals in my mind, the question hit me with, at what point does your cultural givens kick in to how you're going to behave if you actually had the capability to know that answer?
Yeah.
Like, should I pay for it now? Would I not pay for it? And if I do get it, how do I behave? So that would be my question for you. I know, again, we're speaking hypotheticals right now, but I just want to, as we talk about it in the context of what you wrote in the book and the cultural givens you talk about, I'm concerned how you would think those would really guide a person's behaviors.
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and I have like one tweak to the movie script. Maybe it would be like a 2-part movie with 2 different things. Because my sense was, if it was cheap, if you could just find this out for it wasn't like buying a house. If it was $5, or $25 even, what that would do is make it available to everyone. Money's not a problem. If you want to know this, you can find out. And that would be more of a test of your value system. Like for me, if it, when you gave that example, if that were real, to spend $150K to know if I'm, when I'm going to die, for me, that's a no-brainer. There's no way, because I'm not sitting on a big pile of money. There's no way I'm spending $150K to know that. I'm just not. I would never do it. Now, but what's interesting, if I were, if I had been, let's say, in the corporate world and I was making 6 figures for 40 years, as opposed to being a Catholic high school teacher and a teaching poet, where I was, I was happy when I got into 5 figures. That was a celebratory day. So I don't have the it's not money I could just spend and not miss. There's no way I would spend $150K. But if I had a lot of money, that might shift how I would answer the question. So I just wanted to put that piece in there. If it was cheaper, it would shift people's perspective of it, I think, also. But to your question about cultural givens, I think for sure, cultural givens will impact how someone looks at death and dying, the reality of death and dying, and then if they know when they're going to die or what they don't know. So I'll go back to mine, because I can speak specifically to my own cultural givens quickly. So when I was a young kid, my cultural givens was that when I died, and this wasn't like a story, this was the truth. This wasn't like, well, here's what we think. It wasn't that. This is the truth. This is what happens. So when I die, my body decays. It goes into a hole in the ground. All right. But my soul rises, out of my body. And then here's the catch. So depending on my behavior, my soul is either pure and white, all right, or it has spots on it. And if I had some little sins that had like little spots, and if I had big sins that had big spots, if I had really big spots on it, I'm going to hell. All right. So if I know, if I live in that world, that's basically a Christian view of it. If I live in that world and I know when I'm going to die, I either don't care, say, all right, I'm going to hell, or I start amending my life.
Mm-hmm.
If I live in the world now where my view of what happens when I die, and I could speak to a lot of things I've heard from a lot of different people, religious people, spiritual people, different traditions, different, people who claim to have had a near-death experience and come back. So my basic take on what happens when I die is I have not a clue. I do not know. And because of how I've lived my life this far, and I've let go of the cultural given of the soul and the black spot, and I just see that I froze again, and I'm going to assume that you can still hear me. Yes?
Yes, I can still hear you.
That happened. So what I'm going to do, just really quickly as we're talking, is see if I can shift this for a second. So give me 1 second. But basically, I'm going to keep talking as I'm doing this. I would like to think that nowadays that having the ability to know I'm going to die, I would just keep living my life the way I'm living it. I apologize, I'm a little bit distracted because I went and
No, I understand. I
yeah,
understand.
kind of unplugged and then replugged in the camera. I wish I knew why I did that, but I'm beyond those cultural givens of the that Christian version of the soul rising up and either going to hell or purgatory or heaven. My take on those issues is that if there is a heaven and a hell, and I don't know, those are stories created by men, a few thousand years ago. But that how we live now is our heaven or hell. And if in fact there's consciousness beyond death, and there may well be, but I don't know, that if we've lived a good life, we're going to continue living with that energy of the good life, and that's our heaven. And if we're basically doing damage throughout our lives and not being kind to people, we're going to live in that, our souls, our consciousness will continue to experience that kind of disruption and anger and rage or, negativity, but I don't know. I mean, that's just me thinking out loud. I wouldn't pretend to really know that. But challenging what we're given around death and dying, especially because the myths in any religion tend, when we're given them as children, they're stories that are basically accessible to children. And that's why they're used. Sometimes the adults actually believe them literally too. And we know that some people literally believe in the literal interpretation of what's in the, Judeo-Christian tradition. But, I'm agnostic at this point. Show me some evidence of this place where God is dwelling with Moses and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and or not. But I don't really know.
I really begin to think about, again, putting the question in the context of the narratives that you speak of in the book and the healing process. Now look at all the historical reference you talk about in the book, as well as I believe is it 7 greed.
The 9. There's 9. I identify 9 specific traits of the collective American shadow. So should we name them or?
Yes, name them for
me. So ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. And those 9, there might be more. I don't know. But those 9, you can really find them throughout American history. And not just in American history. If you look at any nation state, more or less, you'll find some evidence. But those 9 are definitely there. Yeah.
So that brings to mind a question, which is, do you believe that of those 9 traits of a shadow, is there one that's more dominant, or can have a person have one that's more dominant, or is it more about they're fluid? They can just, so if you're going to be greedy, you're also going to be untrustworthy. So certain things just kind of group together where you're going to have multiple traits, or is it, can you just be greedy alone and just, or evil, or does evil and greed go together? So that would be my question in that context. That's a two-part question. That's the first question. And then the second question would be discovering, as we talk about the healing process. Now we're saying, am I going to die? If you discover that you have exhibited those traits throughout your life, is there a way that you can now kind of course correct to kind of say, okay, I realize I'm going to die, so let me really begin to put that focus on that, because as you say, I've reached a stage where I know I'm closer to death than I am to my first breath. So let me course correct. Is there a possible way to course correct and become self-aware in that context?
Yeah, so I love that. So I'm going to actually just give a short answer to the second question first, and then I want to go to the first question, and I'll come back to the second one. So first of all, and evil itself isn't one of the traits. So I don't identify evil because that word is such a. Wow. I mean, I have my working definition of what I mean by evil, which I've learned through study, not through coming up with my own definition. But it's not one of them. But to the second question, I think absolutely yes. I believe in redemption. I believe in revision. I believe that we can make up for our sins. I think that's definitely a real human trait. It has to be honest and authentic and intentional, but I absolutely believe that we can do that. So now I'll return to that. In fact, that's what the book is really doing, this idea of healing the transgressions of the past and even the transgressions of the present in American society. That's what the book is talking about. So I definitely believe in that. I use the word redemption, that we can, if we screw up, we can redeem ourselves. And first step is acknowledging that we've sinned or screwed up or missed the mark or did damage or whatever. Back to the first question, I don't know that there's a dominant trait of the 9, but I do believe that in the order I name them, there's kind of a relationship among the first few. And I think if I had to name an underlying trait that makes the others possible, and I don't think this is a concrete thing where you can say, okay, this is here and all the others emerge from it. But the closest thing to that, I would say ignorance, because in my understanding of ignorance, as I've looked at it, ignorance simply means, ignorance is not a bad thing. It can be, but ignorance means not knowing. If you're ignorant, you don't know something. And in the history of the country, as I wrote about it, and as historians have written about it, because I'm not a historian. So ignorance of something, let's just speak about humans now. So, the short version of American history, we're just picking on the British now. So the British came here on their way. They were ignorant of Africans, and they felt they were superior to them, so they enslaved them. They kidnapped them, enslaved them. They died across the Atlantic, they threw them overboard. They didn't treat them as human beings. That's ignorance. It led to arrogance. We're superior to these people. Exact same thing manifested slightly differently with Native Americans, indigenous peoples in the Americas. Ignorant about those cultures, let's lie to them, take their land, and if we have to, we'll kill them. Same, so different content, but same context. So ignorance led to arrogance, which led to fear of the other, which led to bigotry, which in these cases led to violence. Now, the rest of those, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness, those are less, I think, specifically coming from ignorance, but I think they are, in a kind of more amorphous or ambiguous way, come from ignorance. If I'm greedy and my greed hurts other people, that's because of my ignorance and maybe my arrogance and bigotry, because I don't care about them. If I'm untrustworthy, it probably comes from fear, and fear arises out of, in most cases, out of ignorance. And let me say it this way: not all fear arises out of ignorance, right? Fear as a shadow trait. So if I'm, I've told you this story before, and you're a dog owner. When the green-eyed German Shepherd named Sparky back in the mid 1980s pushed the fence open, the gate was supposed to be locked and it wasn't. And it came out and jumped on me, and I did. I protected myself. I was terrified. I was afraid. That's a rational, self-preservation based fear. That's a good fear to have. I protected myself. Fear of an unknown other, a different culture or skin pigmentation or ethnicity or whatever, that's not a rational fear. That's a fear based in ignorance. So Sparky had my left forearm in his mouth, and I had to do something. I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. So we're not saying all fear. We're not saying fear is bad. We're saying irrational fear is problematic. So, that's a long answer to the question, but I would say ignorance is foundational to some, probably many of those other traits. Because if you look at history, men were ignorant of women. Women were inferior. Right? Whites are ignorant of Africans. So let me rephrase that. The British colonizers were ignorant of the Africans and the Native Americans. And a lot of bad things happened based on ignorance, manifesting in arrogance, again, fear, bigotry, and violence, and even greed. I mean, using slave labor to make more money, not to do so much work. Greed, pushing the Native Americans west of the Mississippi so that the white plantation owners could have more land to grow their crops with slave labor. That's all greed based. So the relationships kind of go out in all different directions. And again, this is my processing this, and I feel that history backs it up. But I would say if there is a root, it begins with ignorance.
Now, I want to deal with one of those traits specifically. Then I want to bring that back to a topic, which is untrustworthiness. So just to make sure that we're clear on this, and before I ask my question, and I'm clear of the definition, but I want to hear how you're utilizing it. I can make sure I stay within the context. So how are you utilizing untrustworthiness as a negative trait?
Yeah. So as I used it in the book, and I myself and my editor, a wonderful person named Dill Boyle, we tried to come up with a shorter, more convenient word than untrustworthiness. But betrayal is the act. It's not a trait. Right. So for me, untrustworthiness simply means that I can't, and I have to use the word. I'm going to use grade school. They said you can't define something using the same word. Remember getting hit for that?
Right.
Don't use that. Don't do that. But that means I can't trust that you're going to fulfill your promise or keep your word. That's untrustworthiness in the other. And untrustworthiness is earned. So I can look at, here's an easy one. I can look at the United States federal government's behavior around treaties with Native Americans and saying not pretty much, strike that from the record. The jury will disregard that word. All right. The federal government was untrustworthy with Native American nations. They broke every treaty, 500 something treaties, whatever it was. All right. So I'm using it that someone is untrustworthy because they've proven that they don't keep their word. That's how I use the word in the book.
Okay, so basically, the onus is upon. It's not on the individual. It's the recipient or the other person that feels like, for example, someone would say, "I'm untrustworthy of their trust. I'm not worthy of their trust." Right.
Okay.
In that context. So now you said trust is earned. So now let's look at that in the context of the question, am I going to die? So and we're going to use a hypothetical again. So I go to the doctor says you have X months to live because you have this disease, right? And I'm not going to say a specific disease. I don't want to bring it on me, but I have a disease. So I've been given a timetable now of how long I have to live. So I got approximates. And so for me now, I begin to prior to that, I didn't really care. I was caught up in my negative traits, my shadow traits. I didn't care. Now I'm reflecting, and I want to begin to make a difference in my life. How can I become more trustworthy when I have no control over that? A person has to feel as though I've earned enough. Stephen R. Covey talks about in this book, emotional deposits. You make an emotional deposit and withdrawals. I have to make enough emotional deposits, so to speak, in this person's emotional account in order for them to now begin to see me or to earn their trust. Yeah. So I guess that's my question is, how would I begin when I can't control someone's emotional bank account to get them to start seeing me trustworthy before I die?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I want to just qualify one thing too, because you pointed to this kind of indirectly, and I appreciate that. So as much as I do believe that the federal government is the easiest example. They betrayed Native American nations, various nations, hundreds of times. So it's easy to say in that time period, the federal government was an untrustworthy body of governance. That's just pretty easy to say that. The flip side of that, though, is I can be, you can be, any individual can be a trusting individual. So like my default is to trust somebody until they give me a reason not to. So I need to be betrayed before I stop trusting somebody. That's just because my inclination is to project trust onto somebody. And I just trust that people are basically good. And occasionally you get burned on that, and that's okay. So because that's the two-way street that you're asking about now. So what is it that you could do to you in this hypothetical, that one could do in this hypothetical? I know I have this much time to live now, and just so I'm clear, I want to prove to somebody that I'm now a trustworthy person. That's what we're talking about. Is that it?
Right.
Yeah. I think there's two basic, and I'm making this up as we go, but my guess would be there would be two basic steps. One is to express remorse to anyone I had previously betrayed. Just to express it, to say it. I know I did this and I'm really deeply sorry. And then two, in whatever way I can, to back that up with my subsequent behavior up until the day I die. That I do things that reinforce and validate my statement of remorse, so I no longer act in an untrustworthy way, and that it would allow the other, if he or she were so inclined, to begin to trust me. But again, when there's two people involved, some people who are betrayed, you or I, if we were the person that did something that was untrustworthy, we could make amends, we could express remorse, we could, behave impeccably for the rest of our life. And some people are just never going to trust us again. So there's both of those are in play, and we can't control the other person's perspective. I've never been able to. I don't change anybody's mind. I can behave in a different way, say something, and then they might change their mind or their perception. But I know enough, and I teach and I coach people. You know this. You don't change anybody else. Right. It's hard enough to change ourselves.
Right, exactly.
So did I get to the heart of your question, or did I kind of skirt around it? Because
No, you did. You did. And it was a question. Well, you framed it more from a one person trying to get another person to accept. And I meant more from a context of person that has self-acceptance and self-awareness to say, I'm untrustworthy.
Okay.
To everybody. Like, I'm just not a person you can really trust. And I didn't care prior to that because I lived my life off my instincts. And my instincts said, be only focused on what's the best interest of me. And that conflicted with someone else's needs, desires, wants, feelings. So be it. But now that I've gotten this news that I can die, I want to become more of a trustworthy person. I want people to see me as a person they can trust. Like you say, you're initially a truster. So you extend trust initially. And that's interesting. I think most people are not that I meet.
Hmm.
I think we are trusting of certain systems, and then I think that because we're trusting in those systems, that hurts the most when they let us down or they betray us, as you say, like the hospital system. When you put your loved one in the hospital, you're trusting that the doctor's going to take care of them, and the nurse staffing and people are going to do their best to save your person and not kill them. And then you find out it's a killer nurse that was going around killing people. That now interrupts that pattern, interrupts that system. So now you can't trust that system.
Yeah.
But now, when it comes to just individuals you meet in common place, particularly in business, as you build relationships, let's say, for example, in your business as a coach, can you be changed of being trustworthy? I mean, trusting, I'm sorry. Can you be changed from that perspective? Can enough people that you come along create in you where you're no longer going to extend trust anymore because you feel as though society and the people you're meeting now are not worth trusting?
Yeah. So my gut level response to that is, um, I can definitely be disappointed, but my disappointment is with one other person, not so much a collection of people. And if somebody betrayed me, if several people betrayed me or didn't keep their word, whether it was a kind of a superficial not keeping the word or something that was really serious, that cost me a lot of time and money, that really impacted me. I think what shifts in me when that happens, and it's happened on really not a really horrible way, but what that does for me is rather than becoming less trusting, and this is going to sound like a semantic move here, and maybe it is, but I'm being honest. I become more skeptical, not cynical, but skeptical, and I ask better and more precise questions before moving forward with a client or a company or whatever it is, so we're really clear on what we're agreeing to. But I don't. So far in my life, betrayals haven't led me to be less trusting. But I have learned, and especially because I'm relatively new to the business world. I mean, I was an educator for from my early 20s through. I still am an educator, but I've only been working with people in the quote unquote business world, since the mid to late 2000s. So I'm still kind of a newcomer here. But then there were people I didn't trust in education too. Some of them, it's not like untrustworthiness is exclusive to some discipline or industry. It's really not. I mean, it's a human thing.
Right.
But I don't think it's being untrusting for me would be a heavy burden, is a kind of burdensome way to get up every morning. And it's more about my own health and well-being than it is about who's out there that's going to try to scam me out of, there's just on my phone. There's one company that I never really have conducted a business with that constantly sends me texts, and I'm trying to get them to stop and block them, and I haven't figured out how to do it yet. And then there's the scammers who basically tell me that my bank account or my retail account with somebody is locked, and I have to click on this link. The phishing stuff, and that's just what's out there. And I navigate around it, but I don't stop trusting the rest of the world because there's some bad actors who are trying to scam me out of my money, because I'm really careful with that stuff. And plus, if they were really good at what they were doing, they wouldn't target me because they're not going to get much from me. So, yeah, that's my take on it. But it's annoying. It's definitely annoying. So,
I know our topic is am I going to die? And I've really kind of hammered on the trust or the untrustworthiness trait. But I just want to make one more comment about that, because as you were talking, I really began to think about this. And to me, it's all in the greater context. Am I going to die? Because I think at a certain point, we all ask ourselves that. Obviously, the older you get, it becomes more of a dominating thought than it is when you're younger.
Right.
But my question around untrustworthiness is not so much now trying to gain trust from someone else. It's questioning now whether or not you yourself, and I'm not asking you this question, this is more of a hyperbole question, or are you yourself trustworthy of, like, say you've been married 3 or 4 times and you meet someone else that you're interested, and you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't date this person because I'm untrustworthy. I don't trust myself to be committed and follow through. And so now I wonder how that, and I'm not asking you personally, but I just wanted that as a general context, how that can now drive or steer a person to redemption.
Yeah. Now I think it's a really important question. And the easiest way for me to receive it, rather than kind of giving a generalized hypothetical, I'm going to answer it personally. And anybody can do that. Take that question and really reflect on it. So I know that throughout my entire adult life, generally speaking, I'm trustworthy. I have colleagues that would admit that. I have students, I have basketball players, I have family members. I'm somebody they can rely on, they can trust. Have I ever screwed up? Absolutely. When I realized I screwed up, I made amends, and it wasn't a pattern. It was either an unskillful moment, ignorance or fear or whatever, when I did something that was, less than trustworthy. What helps me, because the more I learn about this existence and myself personally and other human beings, is the more I realize that we don't know about our existence as human beings. Like the more you learn, that. What helps me is I've gotten increasingly comfortable saying to myself and to people I care about. When I say care about, that's family, friends, clients, whomever, people that I interact with. When I don't know something, I say it. I say, I don't know. And when there's a decision to be made, and I know that I'm not certain about what's the best course of action, or even just a good course of action, if I can't figure out the best, I say, I'm living with this uncertainty now. I don't know. So it's like acknowledging where I really am, instead of, which we do when we're younger, you try to make believe And I did that, as a young high school teacher. That was the worst thing you could do. They'd ask a question, you don't know the answer, you tried to fake it. And they're all like, 14 to 18. They can see through they have great bullshit detectors at that age. And so, so I just learned to say, I don't know. And let's find out together. Ask me good questions. If I don't know, we'll figure it out. And that's what we did. But I just have learned that making believe, whether it's a personal thing, a business thing, that's never a good ending. I mean, it could be. You could get away with it and figure out the answer and then be okay. But I don't want to have to, like the great saying, a liar needs a good memory. If you're just telling the truth, I don't know the answer. You don't need to remember. You don't need to memorize that answer. You didn't make it up. It's true. I don't know. So I think definitely that any one of us can do the work to become increasingly more trustworthy in our lives if we haven't been, and to maintain our trustworthiness if we have been. I really believe that, but it has to be intentional, as you say. It has to be self-aware. It has to have critical thinking, and in order to really to do that, it's not magic.
I know that. I just want to make this more comment, and this is me saying this personally. I consider myself trustworthy in 90%, 95% of things I can encounter as business, relationships, things of that nature. But I do have to question my trustworthiness when it comes to romantic relationships. And mainly because when I was definitely younger and growing up, I was always more concerned about my career. So if I got invested with someone, it never was going to stay with her. Even though I might not have told her that on day one, I kind of let things go the way they were. But eventually, because I hadn't found my purpose in life and I wasn't happy, I wasn't fulfilled myself, I couldn't bring happiness to the relationship. So I was untrustworthy in that context. And that has led to me being single, not having kids most of my life, or not having kids in my life and being single most of my life. So that's something I have to wrestle with even now at this stage of my life. I ask the question now when I think about dating, am I trustworthy to date this woman who and expect her to put 100% in when I'm not trustworthy enough, or am I trustworthy enough at this stage in my life to do that? So that's something I want to reflect. But that leads to, as an excellent segue into what I want to say as we shift into this session of our show, where we're exploring how people wrestle with that. And so my question would be, what do you want to leave our listeners with? How do we wrestle with how to deal with the question, am I going to die? How do we wrestle with that question in our lives?
Yeah. So I want to just flip that really quickly to answer it. So that's one of the statements. That's definitely not a question. So it's not, am I going to die? It's, I am going to die. So we're banging,
right.
You know, if anybody has some inside information, let me know.
That's right.
You know, so I'm going to die. Right. I mean, yeah, for me, a good way to explore that is really sit with it. And there's a wonderful teaching. It's called the 9 Contemplations of Atisha. If you Google it, you can probably find it. But it basically goes through 9 truths about dying. And I mentioned a couple of them earlier. Everyone dies. No one knows when they're going to die. Nobody knows how they're going to die. Nobody knows where they're going to be when they die. Each breath brings you closer to death, not further from it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sit with that reality, not in a morbid fascination like, oh, I'm going to die, but just that's true. It's real. Sit with that. And how does knowing that and being aware of it impact, if at all, how you feel and what you do when you get up in the morning, live your life, and you go to bed at night? And just play with that for a bit. That's one. Just be with that reality and reflect on it. Not morbidly. Have fun with it. You might as well laugh because you're not going to change it. Right? And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. And then the second thing is look back at the other questions and statements. Who am I really? What's my impact? Everything is a story. Notice how each of those informs your response to your morality. Yeah, Freudian slip, mortality or morality. So, because it does, who you think you are and what you think your impact is and the stories you tell, among other statements and questions, definitely has an impact on how you would hold your dying, and vice versa. That you're going to die impacts. Those 7 questions and statements interact with each other. They really have an influence on each other. So reflect on the reality of your death in a kind, compassionate way, and then just see how those other statements and questions we've explored inform the prospect of your death, because it's going to happen. Yeah, and it's mortality, not morality, that I meant to say.
Absolutely, and you're right. I did ask that as a question. I guess that still shows my youth. When you're younger, you say, "Am I going to die?" And I think the older you get, you realize, "Yeah, I'm definitely going to die." I'm making that transition now when I feel the aches in my body. Like, this model's getting older. Things are getting a little more difficult to do than they were before. Injuries are taking longer to recover than they had previously. But you're grateful for the mind you have, the wisdom that you have. You wouldn't trade that for the world. To go back and just real quick before we bring it to a close, I know what's in the news right now is, we talk about basketball, what you've been a coach and a basketball player by John Morant, and what he's done. And again, I always say I judge the behavior, not the person. Because for whatever reason, a person can always change, but you still got to judge the behavior. And I think that's the reality of it. And his behaviors at that time were just idiotic. And I don't know if you've seen the video of him, holding a gun, but that's even more laughable when you hear that it was on his Instagram stream, and he's sitting there. It's a little bitty gun too. It's like he's not even a threatening gesture. He's holding a gun like this. So it's like, you cause all this trouble on yourself mainly, and you're not even threatening in the video. You're trying to be a rapper, and your very image that you're trying to be this gangster rapper, this gangster image you're trying to portray, and the very feed that you show out to the world is that you're farther from it.
Yeah.
But yet still you're still going to get the consequences that comes along with someone at your level of influence and fandom and things of that nature, celebrity. So I just want to throw that out there because I think that a lot of people, get caught up trying to defend them because, they want to try to say, well, he's young. And that's why I was going with the whole, when you're younger, you don't think you're going to die. That's the furthest question from your mind. And it is at one point, life, wisdom, experience shows you, I need to consider that. Like you say, I got to sit with it. So definitely thank you for that. But as we bring the show to a close, I want to share who we believe are examples of people past or present who we feel have exhibited their fully human characteristic traits. So do you have anybody in mind that you want to share?
Yeah, something you said earlier in the conversation, I forget exactly what it was, but this image came right up to mind for me. So I'm just going to share it. So somebody that we lost early in 2022, the world lost, was the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who just, was this beautiful human being who I believe he was a Fulbright scholar. He came and he taught in the 1960s at I think Columbia and Princeton, and then when the Vietnam War, when America really accelerated the Vietnam War, he protested against the war, against all the sides. He protested against the North, against the South, and against the U.S. So he was against the war. There weren't a lot of people who were against everybody, and he was banned from his country for decades. And he built these monasteries and this practices in France. He moved to France, and then gradually he became a worldwide teacher, doing a lot of retreats for Vietnam veterans, not just American veterans either. And eventually was allowed back into Vietnam. I forget what year it was now, but it was in the 21st century when he was allowed back in. And he died in January or February 2022. But this idea of living peace, that's the title of one of his books, in fact. He just was the whole, the whole shebang. He had it all. And he was a correspondent with the Christian mystic and monk Thomas Merton and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because the three of them were against the Vietnam War and of pretty much the same generation, I think. So he's just always been kind of a hero to me, and I got to sit with him with 100 other people in a retreat back in, I think, 1998, 99, which was the palpable sense of being a holy man. I haven't met anybody else that had that kind of energy, but really just you felt his peace, his inner peace, when you were near him. So Thich Nhat Hanh.
Thich Nhat Hanh. I definitely got to do some research and look him up. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, mine's going to be, and I'm in this kind of mood where I just really want to recognize mothers. And as any woman who, is a mother and continues to show her children unconditional love. One of my favorite African scholars, Dr. Joseph Ben Jochannan, once said that a mother is the closest thing a child gets to truly see and experience God. And I think about all the wonderful things that, my mother has done, and most people from my generation, how they feel about their mothers. And I just think about how the world is such a wonderful place that mothers are alive and exist. And you just watch the energy and the natural instinct that mothers do to bring love or welcome a child into the world and then give that child love. That's the first thing that the child receives, So I think that, even though we do honor mothers on a Mother's Day, I think that women need to be honored more, because if women treated children as much the way men treat it, which is, And again, I know there's some great fathers out there, so I'm not knocking any father who's putting in the work, but I'm saying in general, men tend to be less empathetic, less compassionate, and much more about the common sense numbers and practicality of things. And women bring that emotional love, and that's what children need. And I just want to honor mothers in that context as my fully human connections.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks for that.
Well, this has been another Wednesday, another great show. Reggie, thank you for the question. And not the question, the statement. Again, I got to, I've never thought about that. See, today, and I got to ponder and sit with it, as you say. So I'm going to do that. So going forth, but let's go ahead. So I hope you all enjoy that conversation. Follow Reggie's advice, sit with that statement. I think that's something that can help us reflect and push us down that road to become more fully human. So thank you for your investment of time and energy in watching the show. Please engage with us on Facebook or YouTube and, put your comments. Let us know what you think about it. And until next Wednesday, everyone continue to work on how we can be more fully human. Thank you again, Reggie, for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, King. You're